By the rivers of Babylon, yeah, we sat down and we cried when we remembered Jerusalem. We were sick, Lord, near to dying.
Shalom, shalom, family. Welcome to another Tanakh review. My name is Zurishaddai, one of the teachers of Congregation BINAH CHOKMAH, located in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York. Our address is 382 Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. We are located in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. Thanking the Creator of heaven and earth for all things and everything, food, clothing, and shelter, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Giving glory to the Most High God for all that He does for us. Praying that the Creator be with all those who are sick, under the weather, who might be going through any type of ailment or any type of illness or sickness. We pray that the Most High God be with each and every one of you. Praying that the Most High God be with Yisrael scattered in the four corners of the earth. And I would like to say early Shabbat Shalom to everyone out there, and thanking the Creator for your lives. We're going to be going into Psalm 75, and I'll be passing it on to one of my teachers and one of my mentors, even Nasik Zurishaddai ben Yehudah. How are you, Nasik?
Great, Baruch Hashem. First of all, I'd like to give praise to the Supreme Eternal Universe, God of my forefathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, and due respect to the platform on the D.C.B. channel platform, spiritually the Chief Prince Yariel Saskar, to the host, Chief Uziel, to the Prince's Chiefs, Kohanim, Rabbinate, Maureen, brothers and sisters and visitors, I greet you all in the tongue of my forefathers. Shalom Aleichem and an early Shabbat Shalom. I'll be covering the Sidra Elchev, which starts from the 7th chapter of Deuteronomy, the 12th verse, and goes to the 11th chapter, the 25th verse of Deuteronomy. And Haftorah normally goes along with it, which is Isaiah, the 49th chapter, 14th verse to the 51st chapter, 3rd verse. And the psalm will be Psalm 75. First, I'd like to say, Adonai, Septai, Titakofi, Yagi, Tilateaka, O Lord, my lips, and my mouth should declare thy praise. I'll be highlighting just a few portions here and there, and so much going on. This also came around the second Haftorah of comfort, and which is interesting that the book of Devarim opens up with, with the last Haftorah of admonishment, which is only 3 of those, when the Creator admonishes us about ourselves and our deeds and our shortcomings. Whereas now when we go to the second portion of Deuteronomy, which is Hanan, then that starts the first portion of comfort. Can you imagine that we have 7 weeks of Haftorahs that deal with comforting us and preparing us all the way to Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah, for us to get ourselves ready to be able to say, I'm looking for that forgiveness. I'm looking for that to be close to the Creator. So it only took 3 of them to beat us down mentally and show our moral shortcomings and our infidelity. But it takes 7 weeks of preparation to make us say, okay, you still got hope. You still have a chance. And that should also reflect even in your relationships, that the hostility or the problems that you might have in a relationship should be very minimal. They will come up from time to time, but very minimal, where even though it's minimal, it has such a greater impact than the thing accomplished. So sometimes we got to watch our words when we sometimes rebuke one another, because it takes quite a bit of time to bring back that soothing comfort from words alone, and just words. And we're going to find a little semblance of that, a semblance to that in this particular portion here. But I'm just going to tell you what the portion covers. Starts with rewards for obedience and predicts the defeat of the enemy, exaltation to obedience and humility, then a warning against adultery, and Moses tells the people they are not righteous. And this is something that's reflected in this particular portion when he goes over our history, and he talked to a new generation of people. And Moses recalls the several rebellions. Then we read about, interesting, the Lord restored the 2 tablets that Moses had broke, and then the requirements of the Creator, and then exaltation to obedience of the Creator. It goes on a description of the promised land, rewards for obedience. Obedience to God will dispels all enemy, and that's how it ends up. So now, I won't be covering everything in there that I talk. I'm just going to highlight a few points, because most people had their various teachers and the various congregations had already elaborated on this particular portion. So I just want to kind of do a little review, refresh people's memories, and help prompt them going on to the next Sidra. And hopefully it'll be a motivation in your lives, as well as a spiritual awakening. So it starts off and said, and it shall come to pass, because ye hearken to these ordinances and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep with thee the covenant and the mercy which he swore unto thy fathers. And he will love thee and bless thee and multiply thee. All right, so now, once we look at this word echev is an interesting word, because it's used in the sense of, and it came to pass, but it's actually a hill. The hill, which is the most overlooked part of your body, which is the heel of the foot. Unless people go on, like I said in the past, for a pedicure, they don't focus on the heel. They don't think about the heel. But yet the heel actually supports the whole body. And it's also part of Yaakov's name. It's a Yaakov, which also could have a sense of subplant. And he was a subplanter, but Yaakov. And the thing is that the heel, when the heel itself, those most overlooked, it supports the whole body. And the last presence of a person have when they leave, the last major impression they might have is the heel of their footsteps. So so here it says, as and it shall come to pass. So if it shall come to pass, then why use that term echev? In that sense. But then when so you can discuss that further with your teachers in those areas, and then because many other terms they could have used in reference to, later on in the future, thus and thus will happen. And then when we think about Yaakov himself, when he came out the womb, he grabbed hold of Esau's heel, his brother's heel. Now you say, well, he didn't grab the leg, and he didn't grab the actual major part of the foot. He grabbed the heel. And most of us know grabbing a heel is not really a good grip. But yet, Yaakov grabbed the heel on his way out. So that's something to consider and think about it. And what is it between his brother Esau being born first, coming out the womb first, and Yaakov gripping the heel. And there's always a lot of commentaries in reference to the transition between Esau coming out the womb first and the hand on the heel of Esau that Yaakov had grasped. So those are some things you probably discuss a little later on amongst the teachers, but it's just a lot to consider in that area there. And they talk about the blessing. But he talked about, how fruitful we're going to be and everything on that particular area. We talked about the defeat. But in the 17th chapter, when we got to go into the land, it says, if thou shalt say in thy heart, when we're going to go into the land and conquer it, we got to fight for it, our possession. If the 17th verse of that same 7th chapter, if thou shalt say in thy heart, these nations are more than I, how can I dispossess them? Thou shalt not be afraid of them. Thou shalt well remember what the Lord thy God did unto Pharaoh and to all Egypt. All right, so now, what is what it is that we are sure that the Creator would actually go to our aid. But you figure each nation the 7 nations that's mentioned, and we most of us that follow tradition of reading the prayers every morning, Shakari prayers, you mention these 7 nations, each one of them, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Girgashite, all those seven nations in all, one of them by themselves had more people than we had, and though we had 600,000 men of war, and if you're talking about 300 million people as a whole, each one of those nations had more people than we had. Their people was much more stronger, physically and in every respect, even mentally, stronger than we were. And that, so it said, so more greater and mightier, that means that they had made greater accomplishments even in their world on their own strength than we had thus far as a newly developing nation. We had no merit. We say, well, this is our great accomplishment. One of our greatest accomplishments is that, and it's really not our accomplishment, it's one of our greatest acts of gratitude is what God did for us, more so than what we actually did for the Creator. And that's what made us, make us great as a people, because God went before us. And had God took a strong nation and made them, great, he said, well, God took the best. So it was already better than us in the first place. So God took them because he didn't want to take the bottom. He took the top. But God took the least of all nations in the earth. And that's to give a testimony is that when you serve this great Creator, as we're going to find later on in this book, that's when you become your greatest in life. So we're going to move a little bit further. And we talk about the signs and wonders, and we also talk about we're supposed to destroy the idols and stuff we find when we come into the land. All right, and those are great abominations. All right, so when we go further down the line, what we find here is that in the 8th chapter, all the commandments which I command thee this day shall ye observe to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore unto your fathers. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God had led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might afflict thee to prove thee, to know what was in thy heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he afflicted thee and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know that he might know, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man does not live by bread only, but by everything that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. Thy raiment wax not old upon thee, neither thy foot swell for these 40 years. All right. So now, and the last verse, I'll just read this here, but the fifth verse. And thou shalt consider in thy heart that as a man chasteneth his son, so the Lord thy God chasteneth thee. All right. And then it says, and thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee unto a good land. All right, now I'm going to stop right there. What I want to focus on, we wasn't lost in the wilderness. We was being led, as I said so often, by a cloud by day or a pillar of fire at night. So wherever that stopped at, that's where we wind up in being. What is interesting is that it said, it almost act like when people read this, and especially the critics, they will say that he might afflict thee to prove thee to know what was in thy heart. The Creator knows everything. He knows the existence of a thing, the end of a thing before it even exists, because that's the kind of Creator we serve. There's nothing that he's lacked knowledge in. So to know what's in the heart is really for us to know what's in the heart, for us to discover, for us to develop, for us to prove ourselves that we could do certain things. See, a lot of times we take tests in life. A test just tells you how you did then, but it never tells you about a person's potential. It don't tell you about your potential. It only tell you what that person or what you did at that time. But it doesn't just tell you anything about your potential in life. So, and you say, well, okay, if this is a good God, why he suffer us to hunger? I mean, couldn't he give us another test without some kind of hardship? I mean, to say I can't eat, he wanted me to, really go through a little bit of hunger pains. And so the thing is, when we look at that, and then he tells us, but he fed us with, but he said, but he tells us also, he fed us with manna, and then also that we may know that man does not live by bread only, but by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. So what do that mean? By everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. And in the past, I always say, Moses lived and proved that example, because we're going to see here in this particular portion that he actually ascended the mountain 3 times. Most people think of 2 times in the sense of getting the tablets the first time and getting the tablets the second time. But they don't realize that in between getting the tablets, and I'm going just a little bit ahead of this particular Sidra order, that getting the tablets the first time, we nominated Moses to get it and speak for us and act on our behalf. When Moses seen the sin that the people allowed, the sin of the golden calf, then he broke those tablets. And then after that, you find out later on that Moses himself had to pray for 40 days and 40 nights like unto the first. So rationale would say, when do I bring a second set of tablets up? If I broke the first set of tablets, and this is something that, for people that might have the discrepancy about the, 40 days and 40 nights twice, is that what would it look like if I'm going to pray for your sins and I'm bringing a second set of tablets up, of stones up, without asking, and without God telling me, and without me apologizing, about the incident of the sin of the golden calf, when God was ready to destroy the whole nation. And then Moses received the glory of God. Then God told him, okay, go carve out 2 other tablets and bring them up like into the first. And only the 3rd time his face shone. Not the first, not the second, but only the 3rd time when he came down. And if you figure 40 times 3, 120, if you give and rationalize, and I'm just going to run in ahead of the story just a little bit. If you rationalize between the 3rd month, either whether you say it's the 5th or the 6th or the 7th of Siwan, the 3rd month of the Hebrew calendar, starting from Abi, all the way to Yom Kippur, give or take a day or two, you can account approximately 120 days. Hence, you think about Yom Kippur, think about the thing of comfort. You think about also being prepared to say, now I'm ready to face the court of judgment, but I'm not looking for the judgment. I'm looking for mercy. So we could consider all that at that particular point in time. As we go there and say manna, all right. So Moses was an example that he lived and didn't eat or drink water for 40 days. But he was sustained by the words of God, because what he did was actually time, whatever it is, stood still for him. And the presence of the Creator, the words of the Creator is activating, life-sustaining. And we get a glimpse of that from Bereshit. When we think about Bereshit, the Creator could have just thought the world into being. He could have thought all the creation into being, but he said, let it be. Oh God, that doesn't have to say anything, do anything. It's nothing beyond his power. But yet he said, let it be. And it was. Let it be. And it was. So he spoke it into being and animated it into being. So those are some of the things that we read and that we learn. Now, some things we don't read about, he said, into bringing into being. One thing we talk about when we talk about wisdom, we read in the Proverbs that wisdom was a creation of the Creator. Then you have to think about, what did the Creator use before he created wisdom? What did the Creator use before he created knowledge? What did the Creator use before he created understanding? So the word of the Creator and the God that we serve is more powerful, that mere words that we could come up with will not do justice to identify who this Creator is. Even in the name, a name tends to limit. And the Creator gave Moses the name, the Yehudah YAH Tetragrammaton, as the self-existing one, something that man can consider. Even Aristotle said, a man of a finite mind cannot conceive of infinity or the infinite. So we went there, he suffered us the hunger, and that we could depend on him. Then he describes 7 different types of produce in the land that we know is more, but basically talk about the wheat, the barley, the vine, fig trees, pomegranates, olive, and honey, date honey that we talk about. A land would eat without scarceness, and talk about type of produce that that the land produce, which is any self-sustaining society need. Then it says, beware in the 11th verse, beware lest thou forget the Lord thy God, and not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I command thee this day. All right. And then in 12th verse, it says, that's when thou hast eaten or art satisfied and hast built a goodly house and dwelt therein. All right. So, so sometimes we exercise more of an attitude of an ingratitude these days, and that's what we do as a people. All right. So now I'm just going to move on just a little bit because so much stuff in here. When most skip the history of some of the places that we went through, some things that we encountered in the 40 years. And he's speaking this here, whole book of Deuteronomy is done with basically within the 5 weeks period in the 40th year. And it goes on to say further, what we find here is that we're not supposed to get in the 14th verse. When if things get good in the land, well, 7:12 verse says, lest when thou hast eaten and art satisfied and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks are multiplied, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast multiplied, then thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, who brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. All right, so we tend to show more in gratitude. And it talks about, again, in the 16th verse, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not. All right. So now, when we read all about this, a God that provides for us shade, protection, and food and water, and a place that no man actually claim as their own. And that's one of the things that sometimes, you need to find what they call a quiet spot, a spot that you have actually where you could be undisturbed when you confront your God. So I'm gonna go further in here and just highlight some things. I'm gonna skip just a little bit more, and we're gonna go. We talk about the rebellions. So one of the things I like to bring out about the rebellion, in the 9th chapter. All right. So let me see. It mentions in the rebellion. Let me just skip some of this stuff because it's a little bit more than I want to bring out. All right. All right, excuse me, give me a moment. Because there's so much here, I just want to make sure that when we talk about the different rebellions, when you go back over some of our history here, he mentions about the rebellion, and it's here to teach you a lesson. One of the rebellions he mentions is about the rebellion of Dathan and Abiram, and which is interesting thing to bring up and consider. And talk about the rebellion of Dathan and Abiram in this particular portion. And when we look at that, you say, well, wasn't the rebellion that they had with Dathan and Abiram was not Korah part of that rebellion? But he only mentions in reference to the rebellion of Dathan and Abiram in the particular Sidra. And you must say, why would he mention Dathan, the rebellion of Dathan and Abiram, instead of mention Korah? When it was the Sidra is named after Korah, and he said he took men, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, they took men. So Korah's name is mentioned first. So one of the things that's shown here is that you, even in rebuke, you got to consider a thing of compassion. And one of the things when you consider the thing of compassion, in that sense, is that Dathan and Abiram, though they wasn't the spearhead of the rebellion, and within this particular time, 40 years ago, well, actually a little less than 40 years, that we find that those individuals, their whole family died. But you happen to have the sons of Korah that's still alive. So if you mention Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Korah, they wasn't like their fathers. They chose the side of the Creator. And since they chose the side of the Creator and moved away from their fathers, and we read a lot of the Psalms that's from the descendants of the sons of Korah, that this shows a type of consideration and compassion for the children of the men that, of the man who happened to be wayward and stood against God. We thought he was only standing against Moses. So sometimes the children of Dathan and Abiram, they all went down together with their father. So they had no descendants left. They may have cousins, uncles, and nephews, stuff like that. But their sons died with them. Their household, their little ones died with them. But Korah, his children still remain. So therefore, it shows that even in rebuke, when you got to tell a brother or sister something, you tell them in a fashion that's the most kindest way you could present it, and also to help them see how they fell beneath themselves, that they're above what they did, and that you also point out a way for them to improve on themselves. As out of concern for you want them to improve and not just to denigrate them in their actions. So those are some of the things you can find here in reference to the rebellion and the way it act. We find that he restores the tablets. And one other thing I like to bring out too, before we go further on in this here, and I'm gonna go into the 10th chapter of this particular Sidra, and I'm gonna skip on down to the 12th verse in the 10th chapter, and it says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul." All right. Now, how do you command a person to love? How do you do that? I mean, how can you possibly command an emotion? And then this is something to discuss further with your teachers, that Moses telling you that you're commanded to love, and you commanded to love something you haven't never physically put eyes on. And here it is, he's not only speaking to the people of ancient times, he's speaking of us to us today. So how do we love the Creator? We never heard him speak to us directly, well, at least the majority of us anyway, never heard him speak to us directly. We definitely never seen him at all, physically. So it's difficult to love the people that are significant in your lives and maintain that love and maintain it on a high level. But yet we're told to love the Creator, and we're told to do that on a high level. Just to save time, I'll just leave that for y'all to discuss more. How do you command an emotion? And why would Moses want us to command an emotion of us like that? And then we go. It said, and in the 15th verse it says, "Only the Lord had delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all peoples, as it is this day." So it's what our patriarchs had done for us. That's what the Creator did. Chose us because of what the patriarchs Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov done for us. All right. So in the 11th chapter, that's where it talks about Dathan and Abiram, and about the exaltation for obedience, because the descendants of and I said I was going a little out of order. So the 11th chapter, around about the 5th verse, and said, "And what he did unto you in the wilderness until you came out unto this place, and what he did unto Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the sons of Reuben, how to open up her mouth and swallow them up, and their households and their tents." So this is one of the things it talks about in reference to the incidents of Dathan and Abiram. All right, and there's two more points I want to bring out, in this particular portion here, and that's in the reward for obedience. And I want to bring out this command here. Well, we talk about rain in due season, the former rain and latter rain. That's another topic. I spoke on it in the past, but when I talk on the Sidra. But I'm gonna go further and speak on this particular portion here. In the 15th verse of the 11th chapter, it said, "And I will give grass, and I will give grass in thy fields for thy cattle, and thou shalt eat and be satisfied. Take heed to yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods." All right. So also, when we say be eat and be satisfied, we're also told in this particular portion. I'm moving kind of quickly, but you could go back over it. Within the portion, is that when you're supposed to be eating satisfied, when you eat and be satisfied, you got in this particular portion, you got what you call a blessing after the meal. So I went a little bit fast in reference to that. And what it means that, if you're eating satisfied, we move the thanks to Creator. That's mentioned in this particular portion here. And we eat. A lot of times we eat food. We eat because we're hungry, but we're not necessarily satisfied. Those are some things we have when we eat. Well, I can eat a food because I'm hungry. And some people these days say I have the munchies. But when it comes down to when you eat and be satisfied in the land, the act of gratitude, it's easy to say the blessing before the meal, but it's very, very difficult to say a blessing after the meal. And I say difficult because a lot of times once you become satisfied, you tend to be distracted, let your mind drift to other places. So the most important thing is the blessing after the meal. And then it says only if you're satisfied. So what if you're not satisfied? And I want to just bring this scenario here. In the wilderness, we was told when manna was given, and we was fed manna, we had every man supposed to get a certain amount of omer per household. All right, so now per person in a household, per person in a household. So if you're supposed to get an omer in your house, but per person in your household, it says some gathered more, some gathered less, but when they measured, it only measured into the level they was prescribed to have for their household. So different scenarios you could view this as. Those that gathered more, were they greedy? And they said, well, this is unusual. This coming down today, I don't know if it's going to come tomorrow. Maybe I don't trust the Creator. And so therefore, I'm going to hoard this and get more than enough. But even though they gathered, when it was measured out, they only had the exact amount they're supposed to get. And those, and those that gather less probably said, I don't want to eat. It seemed like I'm ungrateful, so I'm only going to take just a little bit of much, this much. Sometimes you might go to a person's house and they lay the table, food on the table and stuff like that, and the food is really, really savory and good. But you say, I don't want to seem like I'm a glutton, even though I might want more of that pie. I might want more of that steak. I might want more of that vegetable dish they have. But I'm going to say I had enough, so I don't want to act like I'm really, as we say, glutton at the table. Could that be why somebody took less? Or since it was basically a dry, or could have been in the sense that the ones that gathered more, since we're talking about a certain measurement, a dry measurement, that different dry measurements, some people may not be that skilled in getting the exact amount. And so they gathered more than they thought in honesty that they were trying to gather only the X amount of the omer per person. And those that gathered less might have had the same problem. Well, I'm not sure if this is quite the amount, so I don't want to overdo it. So it's a lot of discussions that could be viewed on, even in collecting of the manna. Now let's deal with the part of satisfaction. Why it talks about 40 years later, though we have basically almost 40 years later, I just use a round number, that it talks about being satisfied with the manna, with the bread, the food when you eat in the land, after you eat and be satisfied, as opposed to giving thanks and being satisfied for the manna while you're in the wilderness. So that is something to consider. The Creator feed me every day. And yet, Moses didn't tell us to thank him for the manna that we're getting every day. But yet, when we get ready to go into the land of Israel, that when we eating in the grass and the fruit produce of the land, and we are satisfied, then we're supposed to thank the Creator. Now, it seemed like it would make more sense to thank the Creator when you're doing something right then and there every single day for those 40 years, as opposed to waiting till I put some work in and then thanking him for that. And then if you say a blessing, we had this blessing that most people say in Hebrew, for bread, but the manna would had to be, min hashamayim, from the heavens. But the bread is min ha'aretz, from the earth. And the manna, we know it's a straight up creation of God, Hashem, the Creator. But we know the bread, we take it through a process, the wheat through a process, the barley through the process, the oats through a process to make the bread. So, and yet we're told to give thanks to the Creator once we're satisfied with that. So those are some of the things to consider when we move forward. And now let's deal with this here. We had a disdain for the manna in the wilderness, though we was getting it every day. It didn't say you're going to have a disdain for your bread when you got into the land. We said all we had to eat is this manna. We tired of it. We remember the leeks and the onions and garlic in Egypt, the cucumbers, whatever, in Egypt. So now, when we say, why would we be more satisfied? I'm just going to bring this out here and then move on to the last portion. Why would we be more satisfied with the bread that we make in the land than the manna that comes from God? And then to do it, would it make any kind of mental sense? Well, let's look at some of the things that we encountered with the manna. The manna looked well, it was attractive, but it tastes, whatever you might have thought in your mind, it tastes like that. So it didn't look like, it didn't taste like it looked. It didn't taste like it looked. When you eat some wheat, you see the wheat, it's going to taste like wheat. When you see a piece of lamb, it's going to taste like lamb. When you're going to see a piece of steak, it's going to taste like the steak. We're going to eat some bird or fowl, the quails. It's going to taste like quail because it looks like it. But when it comes to the manna, it don't look like the food it tastes like. It tastes like whatever we might imagine it to taste like. Though it might have been attracted. So we can't get full satisfaction because what I'm eating is not what it looks like that I taste in my mouth. So it makes more sense that, say, I'm in the land, I'm eating what I produce, that it looks and tastes like what I produce. So that is one of the great takeaways in comparing manna with the produce of the land. We don't never make an offering of manna, but we make an offering of the produce of the land. The one jar of the manna one almond supposed to be put up for perpetuity for the generations to see what God fed the people in the wilderness for them 40 years. But that's another story that we'll be taken away. And the last thing I'm going to speak on before I go into the Psalm is that it talks about another portion of teaching your children the Shema, Kriyat Shema, and then dealing with the 18th verse of the 11th chapter, 18th verse. It says, "Therefore thou shalt lay up these words, these my words, in your heart and in your soul, and shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes, and ye shall teach them your children, talking of them when thou sittest in thy house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and thou shalt write them upon the doorposts of thy house and upon thy gates, that your days may be multiplied, and the days of your children upon the land which the Lord swore unto your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven above the earth." What is interesting is that we was told the hero Israel 40 years later. We should have been listening all the time, but Moses make that a declaration there. We're told to teach. We're told to do certain things. But only now, in this particular portion, we're told that we're going to get a reward for doing that. We're going to get a reward for listening. We're going to get speaking about this law. And we're going to get a reward for also not speaking about this law, but teaching this law and teaching it to the next generation. And when you're teaching it to the next generation, you actually invested in your future, in the future of humanity. And then only very few laws have a reward behind it. And this reward is similar to honor thy father and thy mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. That's what you have in this particular portion. And also you have in this particular portion, when it talks about, not in this portion, that's what you had in laws, in the law, that you have reward for honoring, and then that's in the Decalogue. And the Decalogue is a reward given for honoring your father and mother, life, long days upon the land which the Lord God giveth thee. Also, and that's difficult to do. An easy law to do is if you see a bird, a pigeon upon the dam of its young. That's easy for them to do, to say, well, I'm going to get rid of the mother bird, the female bird that's over the young, and take the young. And it says that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. That's easy to do, but the same reward is there. Now, this one here in the middle we just read, it can be a little difficult at times. It can be difficult talking about Torah every day. It can be difficult talking about teaching every day. It can be difficult listening to the words of God every single day. All right? It ain't as difficult as honoring a parent and mother, but it's difficult to be consistent in it. But yet it says doing those things is equivalent to long life upon the land which Lord thy God giveth thee. So that's a thing to teach. We could learn and discuss more, in the future about that. But one of the things also we find that I glossed over when it talks about remembering the Shabbat day, as opposed well, and God, yeah, Shomer, God the Shabbat day rather, and then in the Decalogue in Exodus it talks about remember the Shabbat, and here it talks about God the Shabbat, and that's earlier when they did a rendition of the Decalogue in the past Sidra. What's the difference? If Moses said, "These are laws that you heard at Mount Sinai," then why do we in Exodus we know God is speaking, and it says, remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy. We know God is speaking. That's in Exodus. But when it gets down to the 40 years later, He's telling us that we heard what God say, God Shomer et HaShabbat, God the Shabbat, keep the Shabbat. So which one is it? Is it to remember, or is it to God? Is it to keep, or remember? And if God spoke this, will Moses bring something else different? We know they're both relative. There's a lot of debate on it, but they say, well, God might have spoke both of them, but we couldn't even listen to both at the same time. Whatever voice it was a unique thing. Because Moses saying that was said then, and you still have some witnesses from that period of time, because only the men of war died that was 20 and upward. They could have said, Moses, that ain't exactly how it went down. That ain't exactly what we heard. So those are some of the things and takeaways we learned from this. Okay. All right. So now, as we ended off speaking in reference to who we should look to, Abraham and Mother Sarah, we could think of other people, but we know very little. We know Enoch was an exceptional individual. We know Noah was an exceptional individual, but and he had more accolades written about him. And they don't even talk about anybody else. We know David was a man after God's own heart, but yet we told even after David's death, we know Moses is an exceptional individual, and we told to follow the Torah and the teachings of Moses, but yet the prophet hundreds of years later, going to speak about basically, basically 1,000 years later, almost 1,000 years later, almost. We're going to speak about look to Abraham and look to Sarah, not none of the other patriarchs. So consider that as we move forward. So 75th Psalm, and we can start there if you got it.
Psalm 75. Give me a second here. Just let me open it up. 75th Psalm, it reads, just give me 1 second here, friends. I had some difficulties. There you go, 75th Psalm. Psalm 75. Lam naseak al tashket mismor le asaf shir.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're talking about a song for the leader. But tashket is actually an instrument, and so it's supposed to be singing this particular song. So a psalm of Aesop. So Aesop is basically one of the guys that's actually wrote this song. And not basically David. It's not one of the psalms of David. Though David wrote most of the psalms in there, it's not one of the psalms that David actually written. All right, but let's go ahead, and it's supposed to be played and sung. All right, second verse.
Verse 2 reads, We give thanks unto thee, O God, we give thanks, and thy name is near. Men tell of thy wondrous works.
Moses definitely spoke about something, gave a testimony in the Sidra here. We need to go over our history a little bit about ourselves, and also the main thing talking about our ingratitude, that we should be more exercise more gratitude. But let's go a little bit further.
It reads, verse
Third.
3, When I take the appointed time, I myself will judge with equity. When the earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved, I myself establish the pillars of it, Salah.
All right. In other words, right then, the Creator got some appointed times, Moedim, as we say. We find a lot of the Moedim in the book of Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. All right. So it's the appointed time. We always say, when, Lord, when you going to get this right? When you going to help us out? When you going to deliver us? So we talk about the rush in the Creator, but the Creator does everything in its appointed time. A lot of the old folks say, God may not be there when you want him, but when he's there, he's right on time. So the Creator is never out of time. It's we that be out of time, out of focus. That's why one of the things about Moedim and one of the things about the Shema that it talks about really, and I spoke on it before in reference to when we deal with the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And when we deal with the Shema, we look at it, there's two letters, the Ayin and the Dalet. When they first read about it, it's written in large letters, and it's written bigger than the normal letters. And then rarely, throughout the whole scriptures, you have the last letter of the word Shema and the last letter of the word Echad with large letters. And that the word, itself, you find large letters or smaller letters in different parts, but never in the same line. And
all right, verse 4. When the earth, verse 3, verse 3, verse 3. When I take the appointed time, I myself will judge with equity. When the earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved, I myself establish the pillars of it, Salah. I say unto the arrogant, deal not arrogantly, and to the wicked, lift not up the horn. Lift not up your horn on high, speak not insolence with an haughty neck. It reads, 7. For neither from the east nor from the west, nor yet from the wilderness cometh lifting up. For God is judge, he putteth down one and lifteth up another. For in the hand of Yehudah there is a cup with foaming wine full of mixture, and he poureth out of the same. Surely the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall drain them and drink them. But as for me, I will declare forever, I will sing praises to the God of Yaakov. Go ahead, Prince.
Okay. All right. So, man, we have a little difficulties here. The letters Aleph, Ayin, Dalet, means witness, and changed around means knowledge. This basically the Psalms of acknowledging the Creator, and also the Creator is becoming the judge of not only us but the world. So that means that even though we might go through certain things during this period of comfort, we talked about what we did wrong. Other nations is not going to be exonerated for the wrong they actually did. That's why the Creator going to be the final judge at the end, and therefore, in the middle of the 10th verse, it says, "I will sing praise to the God of Yaakov. All the horns of the wicked also will I cut off, but the horns of the righteous shall be lifted up." So that means that doing the right thing in the end, you're gonna win. And that's what it is. So I hope you got some of what I said. Any mistakes from my own, and we'll try not to have as much difficulties going on in the future. And then leave the comments, in there. Some things might not come off clear. Not that it might not have been covered, but it might not came off clear. It might have been deleted. Being the computer's upgrading on its own sometime. So leave the comments and support the D.C.B channel. And everybody have a good Shabbat. So I'm going to say Shalom Aleichem, Shabbat Shalom.
Hallelujah. Shabbat Shalom. Shalom. Shalom, Nasik.
Shalom.